Welcome back to another Tim Cain reaction. This time, onboarding new team members. Hello, YouTube. Hello, YouTube. It's been a while. Sorry, I've been really deep into the Alchemy rework, so I haven't posted any new Tim Cain videos, but this is the first one. We're going to get back into the swing of things. We have some time here on Friday, and then next week I'm going to be very busy with some other things too.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Today I want to talk about onboarding new team members.
Yes.
This is from a question from Proidoa8730, who asked, looking at team growth in those photos, they were talking about a video I posted of development during Fallout. I'll link it below. How difficult was it to onboard new people? You need to get new people up to speed as fast as possible, and they clearly have no knowledge of existing implemented things.
Yep.
Especially in game dev where deadlines are super tight.
Yeah, the faster that you can get somebody onboarded to your team, the faster they can start to be a productive member of the team, right? You know, when you hire somebody at this, let's say the start of January, it's possible that they may not even start to do much for the game until 1 month later, or even, you know, best case, 2 weeks later, because they just need to understand the game. And the further along you are into development, sometimes the worse that becomes, because now they don't just need to learn what the game is. They need to learn how the game plays and all of its little quirks and inconsistencies. Who is this? This is Tim Cain. He's worked on Fallout 1 and 2, Arcanum, Bloodlines, Outer Worlds, Wildstar. Very knowledgeable guy. So yeah, onboarding new team members is difficult. It can take a lot of time, and you need to do it in a digestible way. You can't just give somebody your 70-page GDD and expect them to read it all. Nobody wants to do that. The only person that might do that and might want to do that are game designers. I would read a 70-page GDD for a game that I was joining a team for, but that's because that's my job, right? That's my job to know the design of the game. But you can't expect the programmers to know this, you know? So they need to just be caught up with what the game is, what the game is trying to achieve, and then they can dive into the code base where they probably spend more time talking to the lead programmer and the programming team to get down and dirty with that. So digestible, quick info, one-pagers, gameplay loop, game pillars. Sit down and play the game, right? I might just tell people who, I have told people who join teams to just play the game for like 2 days. That's you're getting paid for it. Sit down, entire 6 to 8 hour day, and just play the game. Because sometimes that speaks louder than some boring GDD will.
Interesting question. This is another one of those questions where I never would have thought to do a video on this until someone asked, because getting people up to speed is just part of what you always did.
Yeah.
And so like a fish surrounded by water, it didn't occur to me that I was wet. But I do want to say this, and this isn't directed to the person who made the comment, but just something I've noticed is onboarding. When I hear that term, it always makes me smile a little bit, because it's one of those terms that have snuck into game development from other places, and it makes me realize how much influence is coming in from these places. We never used to use onboarding as a term. In fact,
Really? I mean, it is like a business term. It's kind of like angry Tim face. That's what you do when you don't write your game pillars, by the way. That's the face that you get. Write your game pillars. Avoid this face. It's weird. So did they use a term before? Maybe just getting people up to speed? Onboarding is kind of corporate in feeling, right? Oh, we're gonna onboard you to the game.
From these places, we never used to use onboarding as a term. In fact, I don't even think I heard that term before 10 years ago, and I certainly didn't hear it frequently until about 5 years ago. And suddenly everything's about onboarding. We got to onboard our team members. We have to make a document called onboarding the new team members.
It's true. It's true. And then they'll send you a package. Here's the onboarding package. And it's like some Notion or Confluence link where it's like, welcome to the team. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, you can talk to Jermaine over at HR. It's okay if I mix and match levels from old games to my game for ideas platforming? Yeah, sure. Why not? It's your games. I'm sure you just said integrate a new team member. Even have off. Yeah, you're right. There is offboarding now. I don't know. It's just kind of like it's too structured. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of structure in some cases, especially with like team setups. You do need some structure, but I think that just I don't know. Onboarding is just kind of it is a lame term, and I think that it has become too bloated as an idea. I don't know. The more I think about it, though, I can also see forms of onboarding to the team that I would do for team members for Microraptor, where I do talk about our values and how much they mean to us. I do not want somebody working on my team who is not desiring collaboration with the team and with the community. I don't want somebody working at my company who is not transparent with players when they can be. I don't want somebody who is unethical. I don't want somebody joining my team who is, pro loot boxes or pro gambling or for kids, gambling in games, right? Like, no, I just, so, I can reinforce that with some onboarding or just talking to the person saying, hey, we talked about this when you were hired, of course, because that's why I would hire somebody. Just make sure to live that every day. Don't hide anything. If you have a problem, if you have a concern, you say it out loud. You just be open. You be open with us like we are your teammates, because we are. Thank you, Lazy Cat, for the follow. Appreciate that. Pro $1 ammo refills mid-match. I'm pro fun. Yeah, see, that is a key aspect.
And I'm like, aren't we just supposed to bring them up to speed like we've always done?
Exactly.
It's not like we've never not done these things that I'm going to tell you about. It's just now there's a corporate term for it. It's like when suddenly developers who I sat next to started throwing around terms like ARU. And I'm like, are you what? Like, no, ARU, the average revenue per user. We just got to start.
Oh, that's like monetization. You know what? I bet he learned that from WildStar. I bet he learned that from WildStar because that is a monetization design term that you would only hear in a like free-to-play product. AR poop. Yeah, it's like average revenue per user. Dude, that's such a monetization design bullshit term. I mean, look, it is important. I also think it's retarded, okay? I can think these two things equally. If you're making a free-to-play game, you need to monetize it. But can we stop, like, dehumanizing the players? Air poo.
Average revenue per user. We just got to start measuring how much money that the average customer brings in. And I'm like, well, we sell the game for $50. No, because once you go live or once you have microtransactions, and I was like, ugh.
Fuck microtransactions.
And sometimes it's not just a term from business. In the last few years, I've started hearing the adjective bespoke. I had to go look it up. It means, uniquely made, handcrafted, or artisanal or something. And I realized that until about 20 years ago, everything was bespoke. Every game I made, you made everything. The engine, all the art, all the tools, everything. And when everything's bespoke, you don't need a word like bespoke. It's only recently where you grab a game engine on a shelf and you grab your sound library off the shelf and all your tools are purchased off the shelf. There's very little that you make in-house. Suddenly that very little is the bespoke thing.
Here's the thing. The fact that Tim Cain, as experienced and knowledgeable as he is, had to look up the term bespoke does not say anything bad about Tim. It actually just emphasizes the need and the importance of using common language, especially when it comes to game design. And that's something that I've talked about before. If you are using big made up bullshit words to describe your game design, you are not being a good game designer, because a game designer, their job is communication. And if you cannot communicate in a way that everybody can understand you, you see the pathway here? You're not doing your job very well. So, sometimes there are words that can be used that are accurately describing something, but there are usually better, sometimes less efficient ways to say it that are more understandable by the average person, including your team members who are not designers in many cases, by the publishers who are not designers, by the press who are not designers, by the gamers who are not designers. Do not use bullshit made up terms to describe things that can be explained in a much simpler, more understandable way. Your job is communication. Make it understandable. The only new term I learned lately from people around me was demure. Yeah, don't use demure either. Unless you really need to use that.
So, why am I talking about all this? When I'm talking today about onboarding, what I'm telling you is what I used to do to bring new team members up to speed on the game we were developing.
What would be your guys' estimations here? I would say play the game, basic documentation, sit down with lead designer or a designer or creative director, whatever. Let them ask questions, right? Because more than likely, anybody who sits down and plays your game, no matter how good your game is, no matter how good your documentation is, I guarantee the person playing it will be around average 80% knowledgeable about what you're trying to do. And they might be afraid of asking questions or raising concerns early on. They need the space to do that. If you do not provide them with the space to do that, they will just bottle those up or ask other people on the team who ideally are perfectly informed, but may not be perfectly informed. Talking clever makes you look stupid. It does. I don't think, if you're like creative writing, if you're writing, I don't know, dialogue or some lore, go ham, do what you need to do. But if you're talking to team members, your goal is to make the game as quickly and efficiently as possible. And the way to do that is just to make things understandable. Are people who know your company's ideology? I mean, yes, also that is a big one. People who are aligned with what your company is trying to achieve is a very important step. When we say that we're trying to be ethical and make a premium product at a fair price, we need people who understand that I don't want to hear recommendations to put microtransactions in the game or to sell cosmetic packs for Golden Chronicles, because I won't do it. So, save some time there. Like the idea of having the tester and dev watching and learning. I mean, that's important too, but I think that that's a little bit different than onboarding. I do that a lot. I love to stay in touch with the QA team because they're the ones that know the game better than even sometimes the other people on the team. It's a more junior position. Which one?
Oh, this is called onboarding. To me, that is a very weird corporate term.
It is.
Very sterile, very...
It's a good way to put it.
There's probably a document, there's a folder somewhere like how to onboard people. Anyway, let's...
Interesting. So you're saying having devs watching and learning is a junior position? I couldn't disagree more. I think that if anybody on the development team is not playing the game, and if anybody on the design team is not watching other people play the game, you're definitely failing. You're definitely failing at some point. Sorry, Tim. Keep going.
And, there's a folder somewhere like how to onboard people.
Yeah, I've been there.
Anyway, let me talk about how I used to bring people up to speed on my projects. This always was something you had to do, but it didn't seem like as big of a problem in the past. I don't know why. Maybe it's because this whole industry was new. It was new to everybody, so we were all figuring things out together. Maybe it's because teams were smaller and cohesion is just a lot more natural in a small team.
This is very true and very underrated, but they say that the ideal team size, I think, is like 7 or 8 people, which is why when you do strike teams as part of larger teams, you want to make those strike teams maximum 7 to 8 people. So yeah, that's why I like working in smaller teams, because it does make communication and cohesion better. And you don't need to spread knowledge through so many different channels, right? But that is true. Why would it be easier to onboard people in earlier decades of game dev? I would argue that anybody who is trying to get into game dev in earlier decades, you probably had a higher percentage of those who are passionate about games and game development. And nowadays, you don't really have that. you do often work with people who don't play many games. They don't really care about games. They're doing this because they have a job. And I think that there is sometimes a lack of, what's the right way to say it? Innate understanding of gaming when you aren't. I mean, it's with anything, right? It's no, if it's gaming, if it's cooking, if it's cars. If you bring somebody in here who is kind of like a tourist or just doing this because it's their job, I think inevitably they will just understand less innately than the individual who's passionate about this, who spends all their free time, thinking about games, playing games, talking about games. Going to company as an artist, you should be able to get your mood board concepts and play through, but then get to work. As an artist, I don't need to know what do you do with my assets. I just need to know how you want me to make it. It depends. Like, if people try my game and I find it easier to watch them play and I learn what to fix, what they have problems with, and seeing them get lost. I agree. Yeah, 100%. So a lot of people get lost in my game, so I added a door with a green light on it because green means door is unlocked. Yeah, I do the same thing. Like, my wife sucks at games, and so I get her to play Golden Chronicles because she does not have this innate gamer knowledge that any of you jumping into Golden Chronicles will have. So she's a great test subject for, am I giving the player enough starting information? Very, very useful. I think it's dependent on the role inside the team. Yeah, I think you're right.
Once you get a bigger team, there's more likely you're going to have people who kind of want to do things differently or aren't thinking of exactly what the game is you're making or have different experiences. And also back then, like in the 80s and 90s, there just weren't a lot of games to reference. So if you did talk about a game, even if everyone on the team hadn't played it, they almost certainly had heard of it because there just weren't that many games. Now there are so many games. I think I've mentioned Steam this year is looking at 25,000 games going onto Steam every year. Wild. And of course there are games that aren't on Steam. There are indie games and games that are on Epic or GOG that aren't on Steam. There's a lot of games coming out. And
even 10 years ago, it was easier for me to reference games and for people to know. Even 5 years ago, it was easier. And now, I used to say that I think game designers should be well aware of most new games of importance coming out. Even now, that's just becoming nearly impossible. There's just way too much coming out. And even if you know of the title, you probably haven't seen gameplay because there's been 5 other games that you're watching gameplay of. Even an experienced designer who can watch, 1 hour of gameplay on Twitch and understand the gameplay loop and the gameplay pillars. There's just still too many games. There's not enough time to do all this. Very tough. Reference a game called Haze. I know Haze. And only one person knew what I meant. That was an old PS3 game. I think it came out in 362, but I know for sure it came out on PS3. Around the same time as, I think it was like 2012. It was like the infamous area. No, it was earlier than 2012. It was around that time. We wanted a time slow ability. That is a good game to reference for time slow ability, yeah. I'm more interested in how to get people really invested instead of just having them do it for the paycheck. Lepus, that is a very good topic. Honestly, I think that it starts with the hiring process. I mean, here's the thing. If you want people that are doing what you're doing for the same reasons that you're doing it, and if you want those people to help you with your game, then you need to first hire them on the basis that they're in this for the same reasons. I mean, that's what we'd be doing. That's what Microraptor would be doing. Yeah, I mean, I can't change people, right? I think TwitchDog mentions that. It's just you need to say we are hiring people who are very passionate about gaming and game dev and who, agree and believe in the same values that we have as a company. And then you need to uphold those values. You need to live those values so that when people join your company or your team looking for another team to vibe with regards to these values and these ways of working, that they actually get that experience. I've worked at a place that didn't have any values as a company and would just shift them based on whatever was making enough money. And so you had this, you had hiring who was hiring some people who were really passionate about games, some people who were just in it for the money, and you had this rift being split where this part of the team didn't care if the management lied to players. This team was very offended if management lied to players because they wouldn't want to be lied to as gamers. And then it pulled the team apart. Gonna go feed your chickens. Have a nice outing. Get your eggs for cheap. As an employee, saying you're hiring people for their passion is almost a red flag for uncontrolled overtime. Unless you dictate in your contracts that you don't allow for overtime. I agree, though. I think passion is weaponized in game dev. We've talked about that before, I think, and you've been here with that Twitch dog. But anybody who's been in the industry for like 5 to 10 years knows that if you have passion, there are many places that will weaponize that in order to get you to do extra work or to work overtime. I think the difference here is indie and AAA. Indie allows the time to be like that. AAA needs you to do your job fast and correct. I mean, there's needs for efficiency in both. The funny thing is nowadays you will find less experience on average in AAA companies than you will find in indie companies. And so you'll often find indie developers have the time because they know how to do things so efficiently that they can make that additional time. And in cases where they might need to work a little bit extra, this isn't a result of bad company policy, but more everybody just understands that sometimes you didn't expect something. Everybody works towards the same goal.
And it's hard to reference them and expect everyone on your team to know what you're talking about.
This is true.
Also, back then assets were made a lot faster, whether it was art or code, features, or design documents.
Lower needs for fidelity, less complex systems, especially for arcade games, which were a lot more popular back then. That's something I talk about a lot. If you want to make games cheaper and not cost $80, then the game development needs to be cheaper, and you need to make game development cheaper by not caring so much about ray tracing and 8K resolutions at 60 FPS or even 120 FPS. I know it sucks to hear, but guess what? The more you ask for from developers, the more it's going to cost. Tools and software doesn't always catch up to the expectations of the market. Personally, I would love to be passionate at work for an indie company, but the market right now just doesn't support that. The unfortunate thing is that if you are in the indie space and you want to work in the indie space, you need probably at least 10 years of experience to have any modicum of dream of landing an interview. It sucks. I mean, that's where people want to go to, right? Is they don't want to work at the AAA. But it is easier to get a job and have a more stable experience sometimes at AAA companies. Indie companies, they're going to vet you very, very carefully because they need to know that you can do what you say that you can do, and even more than that. A 10-person team requires that everybody on the team wear multiple hats. They will not hire just a regular combat designer. They're not going to just hire a regular 3D artist that only does 3D work. They're going to want you to do multiple things on that team because that's what's required. I said so you go AAA, but then they don't want your ideas. They want the FBX by the end of the week. Yep. I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Juniors have a horrible time right now. It just is what it is. Do indies have a low rates of success? Is that why people want to go to AAA so much? Yeah, they do. Indie is by far the most risky form of development. Unfortunately. I wish that more money was pumped into indie devs, but it isn't. It's also very competitive. You're trading off stability for freedom, right? If you don't care about your freedom, go be a slave at AAA. If you care about your freedom and you've managed to last long enough in AAA or some other companies or got lucky, you go to indie, and that's where you have the most passionate individuals, the most experienced individuals. Like I said, if we're taking a look at like Rebel Wolves, right? These guys making that new Vampire AAA game. We scroll down to their Polish team. These are guys with decades of experience, guys and gals. They know what they're doing. They don't need to train each other. They're like, okay, I can do this, this, and this. Okay, I can do that, that, and that as well. Let's collaborate, get it done. No fooling around. I mean, not to say that they don't have fun, but just that there's no, there's no training that needs to happen. If somebody doesn't understand something, they will go and find that information within a matter of seconds, or they will ask somebody else on the team who knows how to do that. To me, you only need 5 guys for a game. 3 if you have me on it, because I can do a bit of everything. That's awfully optimistic of you. Depends on the game. How many copies does a $30 AA game need to sell to recoup its $5 million budget? Recoup? I mean, that's easy math to recoup. To actually make a publisher happy, you could continue a relationship with a publisher if you sold 500,000 copies at $30. You would have a very happy publisher if you sold over 1 million. Indie doesn't have the money to pay juniors for 4 years and take the chance. No, they do not. They don't have the time. They don't have the time to train them. AAA do, but they have a lot of choices, so they can take the best. That's why people want to get into AAA. That's, yep. Very accurately said. Hey, Tonic, how to become someone like them? Like who? Oh, like them? Get fucked as a junior. Persevere through that. Follow your ideals and dreams. Don't be afraid to quit a bad job and take a chance. Never give up on your passion. And absorb every bit of knowledge you can. And step on your ego. Those would be my recommendations. I guess 70-30, they're doing well. 70-30 splitting like the benefit of the publisher or of the developer. If you get 70-30 with the 70 for the developer, that is a damn good deal. Eat pot noodles because you won't have money for... Yeah, you're not... Look, you're going to have to deal with instability. So do you agree that $30 is the biggest price for a game in normal terms? The biggest price? I mean, $30 is pretty low. I mean, I would say $30 is a really good... It's a really good price for a AA game. And high for an indie, but I could see it if the indie is really high quality. AAA, though, I don't know the last time I saw a AAA game for 30. 70-30 for devs, yeah, that is a very good deal. Normally 60-40 for pub. Yeah, it's around there. 60-40, 50-50, 40-60. The better game you have, the better deal you're going to get. That's why the best thing you can do as a developer is actually just make a really good game. And if you try to publish too early or you try to get a deal too early, you don't have as many cards to negotiate with. Do AAA always hire? I only see them fire people. Well, AAA is on fire right now. It's a bubble that I think needed to burst, and it has been a long time coming. Would you teach your son making games? Yeah, if my son wanted to learn making games, 100%. I'm not gonna force him, but I'll, see if he likes it.
Or design documents. So when something got added to the game, that addition was noticed really quickly. Because you're like, hey, that wasn't there yesterday, and now it's there today. You didn't see any build up to it. It's like all of a sudden, people are walking around, or all of a sudden, death animations are in, or something like that. So it's very fast to give feedback, because if you give feedback on something that literally just went in the day before, it's fresh in the mind of whoever just put it in. But these days, pipelines are so long that, just to use art as an example, you may want a death animation, and does the model, you may have to make a model and then texture it and then rig it and then animate it.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a death animation, it's like, okay, well, do you want the mouth to move? Okay, now we have to animate the mouth. It's going to be higher fidelity. Do you have a skeleton that you can just plug all your characters into, or a face rig? I mean, it's just, like you said, the pipelines have gotten longer and they've gotten way more expensive. And that's kind of why kind of why AAA, the bubble is bursting right now, is because games have gotten so massive and the expectations from consumers for AAA games has gotten so massive that a lot of these companies can't keep up with it with the way that they've been producing games. And it's not that no AAA game can succeed, but your AAA game now needs to surpass a higher bar of quality. And we have, if that's the case, which is okay, we have too many AAA companies that aren't achieving that bar. And those will dissolve. And a lot of the people, maybe, I don't know, I can't give you an estimate, but definitely a lot of those people will just quit game dev altogether because they will not be able to find jobs again. They're either too highly specialized that they can only really compete in the AAA market, and the AAA market will shrink, or will become more condensed into a few big companies that can still succeed, or they just won't want to have to learn other things or won't have the time and the financial stability to do it, so they will just leave game dev. And a lot of people have done that, especially with the increase in hiring after COVID, which is now shrinking and starting to recover, but not the greatest. They're specialized, finding something else might be hard. This is true. Yeah. So a lot of them just quit game dev. Indie's a dream, but they're fragile companies, so they hardly ever take a chance on someone who has no footprint. Yes. That is true. I mean, you might also be a good developer too, but you might not be fit for a team. And that could be either for that team in specific, or you might just operate better as a solo developer. I mean, everybody thinks that you can just hire modders, but a lot of modders don't operate well in teams or with more structured milestones and expectations from the development cycle. And on top of that, being able to being able to make games is different than being able to make financially successful games. These are two very different qualities.
And then it gets put.
Hold on. Do you think leaving from game dev is good if you make it for more rational reasons like basic work or maybe science? I think that in a lot of cases, hot take, leaving game dev will lead to a more stable, less stressful, higher paying job. Simple as that.
To make a model and then texture it and then rig it and then animate it. And then it gets put in one of many maps, and you may not see that death animation because it may be unique to a particular weapon that you don't get until halfway through the game. So it may be a long time before feedback happens on that death animation. And if that death animation has to do with the model and not the animation, like we wish the model was more complex. Maybe it had more polygons. We could support a much cooler looking death animation. That model may have been made months or maybe even a year or more before. So there may be a long time to get feedback in a loop. So
that is true. I mean, this is very, very true. And I think that at a certain point, game developers further back in the day used to be both a little bit more secretive, but also less secretive. Then, especially with the advent of AAA companies and the amount of money that went into games, they became very secretive. And they weren't really good at seeking feedback from people, and you still see that with a lot of game developers today. One of the reasons Colton Chronicles is where it is today is because I receive constant feedback on stream, which is invaluable. Otherwise, I'd have to rely on close friends who may or may not have the time to look at my game, or my wife who's not a gamer, but she could still give you feedback on some things. Working in a vacuum like that is very dangerous. Receiving feedback early and quickly is the key to making a good product, which is why prototypes should be very quick, chaotic, fast to receive feedback, fast to create, fast to modify if you need to change something to the core parts of the game.
So there may be a long time to get feedback in a loop. So that's just something else that's changed too.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the methods by which I've tried to bring people up to speed when they get hired onto my teams. The first one is by using your leads. The leads have people assigned to them, and they're supposed to be watching what the people on their team are doing. If the leads are all on the same page, and I hope they are, I've worked on a game before where the lead artist and lead designer and lead programmer were not all making the same game.
Oh boy.
And that's hard. But assuming they're all coherent, and agree in agreement on what they're making, the leads can watch their own people's work to make sure that early on in whatever the pipeline is that those things are going in, they can be checked, and you don't have to wait until something has already been in the game for months before someone notices, hey, this mesh isn't dense enough, or this model isn't rigged correctly to let us do these animations we want to do now.
This is a good point, especially with relation to leads and just general like middle managers like that are managing smaller parts of the team. Sometimes the best person for a lead position is not the most experienced individual, but the person who is best at leading and managing. And I've been in the case where I think that I was working with somebody who was a lead who wasn't the most experienced person in that position, but they were the best person for that position. And that can save you a lot of time and headache down the line. But there are some managers who think, oh, you have the most experience and the most seniority, therefore you will make the best leader for this team. And that's rarely ever the case. Making my game secret is something I do not like. By showing the game every week, you can learn more. I like showing off the new stuff for the game every week. Yeah, and hiding Easter eggs or like spoilers for, main story, that's important to do too. I think the best lead is the most enthusiastic. I mean, there is something to be said about the personality of the leader too. If we assume that a good CEO cannot motivate, but he can or she can, the individual can inspire, then that same thing is true for team leads. There's nothing I can do to motivate my team. That motivation needs to come from within, but I can inspire them. I can help them, feel positive about getting to the next milestone, but the motivation is really individual, and people are motivated by different things. Some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by freedom. Some are motivated by having good, clear channels of communication. Some are motivated by pizza parties. Sometimes, everybody's motivated by different things. I cannot provide that motivation, but I can provide the inspiration.
Another way this is done, this kind of onboarding is done, is guidelines are usually created for code, for narrative, for art. They're wildly different guidelines. We've made guidelines for level designers that explain how we want line of sight and how points of interest, POIs, should work in the levels, and things people should look at in other games to get an idea of how we want our levels to be. And that would be very...
Which, by the way, not only is this crucial and very important, this you should have before or very early into your vertical slice. It's not just that your vertical slice needs to match a quality, but it needs to have those pipelines ready for implementation. Now, you might refine that pipeline a little bit throughout vertical slice, right? And I would say the latest at which you should have finalized pipelines is the end of vertical slice, because the point of vertical slice is to create those pipelines. But you should have a lot of the basics already set up and then refine those living documents throughout vertical slice until you're ready to jump into alpha. And if you do that properly, your alpha and beta creations will be honestly just really, really busy pieces of work. You know what you need to do. You know how many things you need. You just need to make them. It's busy work. And if you do it correctly, your alpha is going to be boring to make. It's cool to see it all come together, but it's like there's not all of your unknowns are hopefully solved, or as many as you can solve. And that's a good thing. That means less stress, more just busy work, content creation, things like that. Best motivation is music for you to get in the groove. Hey, I mean, yeah, sometimes that works. That works really well.
Very different than what an art guideline would be, where it may reference a movie and say, we're trying to capture this kind of look.
Yep.
But we're not going for that movie's dialogue choices. For that, go to this book or this TV show or this movie, and we went dialogue like that.
That's why references, you might have a game with like 10 different references. Even Colden Chronicles has a ton of different references. I need to kind of update them a bit. But, we have references for our game too that can span from anything from from Skyrim, right? For our alchemy system, or from The Witness for I really like its density of a smaller open world map. I like the depth of the Harry Potter and Half Blood Prince potion making. I think potion craft is really cool too for its the depth in creating potions. You might have very different inspirations even for like the level design or for the environments that you want to create or the stylization of the art or for the feel, the emotions that you want. You might take a look and see Elden Ring and Stardew Valley and The Witness. These are three completely different games, but they're all being referenced for different purposes. So, it's hard to sometimes pinpoint, yeah, my game is like this game plus this game. It's easy to communicate, but sometimes your game is this amalgamation of very different references for very different reasons.
So all of these can be very different guidelines that should still come together cohesively in the game. Often, the examples of you give examples of existing work that's already in the game. So, for example, a code guideline may have, here's how we want you to name variables or methods in objects. Here's an example object from the game.
That's really important too for code architecture, and I think having somebody who is going to uphold that code and that standard is very important for any size team. Somebody needs to do it. What are you guys talking about in chat? Early access? What were you saying about early access? Those games were put into early access just to get funding, not to gain feedback, which was the purpose of EA. I disagree, especially you mean Path of Exile 2 was put into EA for funding, not to gain feedback? I would say it was for both.
There may be a guide on how to write characters. We want them to have a certain style in how they talk,
Chronicles
and how they
will have this,
and how quests are given out. And it could be as specific as in any particular node where an NPC says something, there can't be more than 5 PC responses. Give an example of guidelines for that. Similarly, art may give examples of here stills from a game or a TV show or a movie. We want to look like this. This is why I loved it when we went from paper and pencil things to internal tools like Confluence, where you could embed images or even movies and show people rather than describe what Art Nouveau. I'm slowly learning the difference between Art Nouveau and Art Deco. It's only taken me decades. You can show people, this is Art Nouveau. We want it to look like this.
Yeah, I mean, having mood boards, being able to embed these do change the game, and everybody is going to learn in different methods. You might have, people who do need those visual style references. Some people who might sit with a formula better. Programmers usually, or a flow chart. So when you're a designer or you're creating these onboarding pieces of info, having different ways to describe the same thing, even if it's redundant or it seems redundant, is good because it helps to. You might understand 90% of a paragraph, but then that additional picture can be like, oh, okay, so they don't mean this 10% of thing that I was wondering.
One thing we commonly do is we recommend other works for the people to go out and actually experience.
Different way.
So there have been on several games where, depending on where you were hired, I would say it would really behoove you to go play this game because this is really what we're shooting at.
Yes.
Books were used as examples of narrative. Shows and movies were used for narrative and art, and other games were used for everything. And we really, really asked people to go home and watch that movie or watch that TV show, or it would help if you could read this book or if you could play this game. These days, we even give people in the first week or two you're hired, take time out to do this.
Yes, I mean, exactly. And I like that he clarified that it's like, this is not a recommendation. This is homework. And look, we can give you time during the day to do this. That's fine. That's understandable. I think that's fair, right? Because this is work that you're doing. we need you to do this. You need to play this game in order to understand. And if you can't do that, what are you doing here at this company, right? So, very important.
Or two, you're hired, take time out to do this. Go watch 15 minutes of this TV show. Go watch this movie. Play this game. And we expect you to do it, at work, because that's part of the onboarding process. And we'll give you the movie or the game in question to play. By the way, later on, when anybody on the team gets asked by press, and they will, what were the influences on this game? You've got your answer. Just think back to when you got onboarded and go, oh, these were the influences. By the way, it's kind of an inside joke for anyone in game development who gets interviewed frequently by the press. That question, what were your influences? That's kind of like the most vanilla, base, generic question you can possibly be asked, because that journalist, I shouldn't say journalist because a lot of them aren't journalists anymore, that interviewer.
Shots fired. By the way, Tim, agree. A lot of them aren't journalists anymore.
Didn't do much research, because you can ask anybody that. I love when people say, hey, how does this game differ in its approach to this as opposed to this last game you did? That shows that they're actually looked a bit at the game, looked up in past games, and they're asking for a delta, which should give their readers viewers a lot better idea of what to expect than just the generic, what were your influences on this game? But guess what? You're going to be asked that, so you can remember back to your onboarding and go, oh, these are the shows and movies and books and other games that we referenced when we were making this game.
I've had to do quite a bit of like press stuff or like B2C, talking to players and such, and you kind of just you get tired of talking about your own game at some point, because you can tell one person, you can spend 10 minutes with one person telling them about your game, and then another person shows up. You have to repeat that, or the first person left, the second person shows up, and you have to repeat that again, and then the third person shows up, and then the fourth person. And usually, the worst part, I would say, is it's kind of the fault of the developer in this case, but if you go to like a show, like Gamescom or whatever, and you're showing off your game, and you don't have a demo for people to play, I promise you the first question and the most annoying question, and it's not the people's fault, the question out of everybody's mouth will be, tell me about your game. And it's just repeating. And it's like, fuck, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Again, that's where having a demo is like, well, you know what? Why don't you play our demo? Why don't you jump into it, see if it's something that you like? And then they can kind of answer those questions while they play and understand it. And they might have questions or feedback while they're playing it, but those will be a lot more specific and constructive and, right on point. Especially if you can just give them the basics of what the game genre is, and that you can say, well, do you like this kind of genre? Maybe you like this game. Oh, no, I'm not a big fan. It's like, okay, you don't have to play the demo if you don't want. And therefore, you don't have to worry about somebody giving you feedback who isn't even in your target market. Because sometimes, not all feedback is equal. Sorry. But if you are a big fan of first-person shooters, and you're playing my cozy farming sim game, it's highly likely that you aren't in the target market. And I can force you to play. You might have a curiosity to try it, but your feedback may not be relevant to what most of the market feels. Even as a hobby time only game dev, I get tired of that question. How you doing, Athano? Yep. It's just kind of like it's exhausting going to those trade shows. It's exhausting. It's so fucking exhausting. But I like it. I like meeting the players because it's like a reward. It's for people to get excited over the thing that I've been working on. That's one of the best feelings that I can have. It's just exhausting. How do your game take most properly feedback then? How to get the most accurate feedback for your game? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to that. But if we're just talking about market, know who you are making the game for. And when you receive feedback from people, the most important feedback is going to come from people within that market. I'm sorry, but just sometimes not all games are meant for every player. I understand that you don't like my game. Maybe it doesn't have sword and shield combat, but that's not what this game is trying to be. Why did you get into games art? Well, because I like football. Maybe that's a good way to get into it.
Another thing I want to point out here is depending on when people get hired, you may already have developed a prototype for them to check out the system mechanics in action.
Yep.
A beautiful corner for them to see finished art in a level, or vertical slice, which is an entire level for them to play, which is at almost near shipping quality in mechanics, in level layout, in narrative, in art. So depending on when people are brought on board, you may have already gotten things done in the game that you may want to make part of the onboarding
Preached
process.
him. I have nothing to add to that. It's exactly what I say.
So those are all the things we do, but let me throw out a few risks in onboarding. You're doing all this onboarding because you want your game to be consistent. And like I've said, there's nothing worse than a game that's made by a bunch of people who are trying to make a different game.
Yep.
But you don't want to do this onboarding in a way that will squash new ideas. One of the cool things about hiring new people
it's new ideas and creativity.
They will play the game with a fresh set of eyes that nobody else on the team has.
They'll think outside the box. They will often ask questions that nobody on the team in the last 2 years has ever asked. You know, the problem is sometimes you do need to squash on those, and it's not that you don't like their ideas, but just sometimes there are specific this is really the problem after you've left, vertical slice, or you're in your beta phase. You're about to go, live and release the game in 6 months. There's no time for this, right? It's like, okay, this is a great idea. After release. Absolutely love new hires for that. Yeah, same. 100% same. It's talking about Halo 4. It completely changed the whole dev team twice. God, that's scary. Maybe we had onboarding workstation in one place. It was a movable desk with a headset and PC, and you'd strap the poor sod to this desk for their first 2 weeks of joining and barely get to leave it. I call it the brainwashing mission. What the fuck? Hey Justin, you're back. What are we watching? We're watching Tim Cain, the father of Fallout, as some people say him, and we're talking about game dev. In this case, onboarding new team members.
And they may notice something. They may have a suggestion. They may have just played another game that solves an issue that you guys had that you're just like, we're just going to accept it. This is how it goes. And they're like, oh.
That's underrated, too. That's a very underrated concept because, a lot of the times, that's one of the reasons why I like to hire gamers, is because they have played games. They can see solutions that have been done in recent games. Their knowledge is up to date and likely will remain up to date. If we're working on an RPG game, I want to hire people who love RPGs and who have played RPGs, because then they'll know the competition. They'll be part of the audience. When they play the game, I don't have to ask them, hey, do you actually even like the kind of game that we're making? Oh, no, I don't really like it, so I don't really have a lot of fun with it. Okay, great. So you're not really inspired to come into work because you're working on a game that you don't give a shit about. Wonderful. Having those people there who are part of the market, who have played recent games that have solved problems, like Tim says, it just keeps you up to date and fresh. And even if your game is, taking multiple years to make, you can kind of keep it up to date with the market. And when you make it, it's likely going to be much better quality and more recent feeling than competition.
Oh, I saw this UI that does this better, or I saw an AI that had this interesting behavior. Maybe we could do that too. So you want your guidelines to be a lot of examples with an overarching kind of coherent rule, but you don't want rigid rules because that may squash new ideas. Now, you may have a rule that seems very specific and very rigid. I gave an example, like in any particular dialogue node, you can't have more than 5 player responses. Well, that may be because your UI can't support more than 5.
Yep.
Or you didn't want to scroll. Or you may have a tool that prevents more than 5. This is all great, but sometimes you're going to have someone come on board who goes, I saw a game that had 6 or 7 or 10, or, they had a lot of different player responses, and it was really cool, and people really seemed to like it, which may make you go back and examine why you're being rigid on that point and how hard it would be to relax that. If not in this game, then you can put it on your list of like, hey, here are some things we might want to try to do on the sequel when we have more time. Maybe
save it for the. I mean, how many times do I say it? Sometimes save it for the sequel. Great idea, cost too much money, too much time. Let's make a sequel and use that idea. And write it down, and so we can actually approach that from the prototype or from the vertical slice when we have the bandwidth and the ability to dive into that new idea. Who is that? Last Epoch? It's a ARPG game made by massive fans of ARPGs that I think got together on Reddit and formed a team to make an ARPG that to them would solve a lot of the problems that ARPGs had. And they did a damn good job with it. It's a fun game. Very good progression and feeling of very good feeling of power progression.
Maybe we can have 7 responses or 10 or an unlimited number, and just there's a little scroll bar, and you just keep scrolling until you've exhausted all your possible responses. These are examples of things that may come up from onboarding someone. A great idea that either you can change the game you're making or make a note that a sequel or whatever your next game is, maybe there's a better way of doing this. So, I hope this answered your question, Proidoha8730.
Fantastic video, as always, from Tim Cain. Here's the link for you guys. Go give him a like and a subscribe. Great ideas, and I think I would agree with everything Tim said here. I would not agree with what happened at Twitch Dog's company, where they strap people into a desk for 2 weeks. Jesus Christ. It's gotta be so annoying. But if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching that one. If you're watching on Twitch, stick around, because we can watch one more today. But if you're watching on YouTube, thank you, and I will catch you on the next Tim Cain reaction. Bye-bye, YouTube.